really encourage people to, go for mastering your mood, not your time.
Welcome back to Infrastructure Connections. We caught up with Graeme Cowan at our IS Connect 26 Brisbane conference last week. Graeme is the founding director of Are You OK? And the host of the podcast, The Caring CEO. He's also the author of the recent book, Great Leaders Care. Graeme has over 20 years' experience helping leaders build resilient teams where care and high performance thrive together. If that feels like something you need, you're not alone. Let's jump into the conversation. Well, Graeme, welcome to Infrastructure Connections. We're here at IS Connect 26 in Brisbane, and you just gave the Leadership Breakfast keynote address this morning. Could you please mention your book as well?
Yeah, so my book's just come out. It's called Great Leaders Care, and it talks about the moodometer and the importance of it, how you go for the green zone as an individual, but also as a team, because a team has 3 zones as well. And then the Great Leaders Care mindset is, self-care, how we keep ourselves in the green zone. Crew care, which is, building resilience and optimism in the team. And red zone care, which is about being able to identify and help someone who's struggling. But it is followed with, every chapter finishes with a case study. It's not theory. I've interviewed over 90 CEOs for my podcast, The Caring CEO. And these are people that champion a culture of care and culture of high performance. It's not theory. These people are producing it in every industry, government, not-for-profit.
And please talk about what that keynote speech was about.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. I talk about a great leaders care mindset. And what that is embracing 3 things. It's about self-care, building our personal resilience and energy. Crew care, which is about building psychologically safe and resilient teams. And red zone care, which is about being able to identify someone who's struggling, ask, are you okay, and guide them to help. And the second, model I talked about was the moodometer. And moodometer, it's got, green, amber, red zone. And there's really a lot of evidence that says not just the green zone, you feel better about yourself, you're a better partner and friend, but in the workplace, if we're in the green zone, we're 31% more productive, we sell 37% more, and we're 200% more creative. All, just essential qualities for this disruption that's going on in workplaces now.
So this moodometer, it was interesting because it showed what were the top factors. You were in a good mood, you felt confident, and then medium ones, and then very low ones, and then the bottom one I think was death. So that would be 0. But I was struck by the fact that on the moodometer I'm probably hitting all 12 of the options at once, and I'm sure that's fairly common. How do people approach that?
Yeah, what works really well is that it's a tool that everyone understands very quickly, but also there's no stigma with it as well. So if people say, I'm going through depression or I have panic attacks, it's, it can be quite confronting to say that. There's often a bit of stigma around that. But as you say, people go up and down the moodometer each day. And just because you understand it doesn't mean you don't go down to the red zone. But what is really important is having the tools to lift you up again. And, I have a moodometer action plan, which I'm, very happy to share with your members. And it shows if you're in the red zone, these are the 5 things you need to do to go to amber. Amber, the 5 things to go to green. And then if you're in the green, the 5 things to stay there, sort of thing. So I've really tried to make that very, very practical. And I also have a self-care scorecard. So vitality is about our physical health. It's move well, rest well, eat well. Intimacy is about building caring and supportive relationships, both at work and also in our personal life. And prosperity is about a sense of contribution, the energy you get from contributing to your career or a charity or a church or whatever. And so I really talk about, topping up each of those things each day, acting like a VIP, which is making sure that each day we add a little bit in each of those 3 cups to keep ourselves in a good place. It's not good to be fantastic at work and terrible at our physical health, our relationships. We need all 3. It's like a 3-legged stool. It collapses if we ignore 1 or 2 of them.
I like that phrase, acting like a VIP. And what does that mean as far as how you treat yourself?
Well, it means you dedicate time for yourself. And part of the scorecard is that I then have a VIP weekly planner. And so every Sunday I think about, okay, what am I doing this week for my physical health? What am I doing for relationships? Am I catching up with people that are good for me? And if I'm not, I reschedule it. I know you had the guest Richard Buller on here before, and we met by chance at a conference 12 years ago. And we found out we lived a kilometre apart. And so every Thursday, we used to work live near the bush in Gordon in New South Wales. We go for a walk. And there's something about doing that regularly, being in nature. And it ticks 2 boxes. It ticks our physical box in terms of getting exercise, but also just being able to share things. And even, Richard's now moved full-time down to Vincentia, south coast of New South Wales. But we still often catch up just with a virtual walk. So we each have our AirPods on and have our chat for 45 minutes as we both walk in different places.
Oh, that's a great idea.
So it's making time for those things that are really important for us. And I really encourage people to, go for mastering your mood, not your time. Because if you are in the green zone, you're more effective, you're more productive, and you're more influential.
I had never heard of the Are You OK movement until shortly after I moved to New Zealand, moving from the US. And I guess it was during COVID, probably when a lot of people learned about this. But because no one had ever asked me, are you okay in America? And I had never asked if anyone else was, are you okay? In fact, it was probably, there's a stigma around it, and it's something that I wouldn't feel comfortable asking someone. Over the course of your career working in care, what have you seen for that stigma, and how has that stigma changed over time?
I think there's been some really good progress in that department. We know through post-event research that there are people that are, I think it shows about 60% of people asked someone, are they okay, sometime in the last year. But it's also, you're not just meant to say, are you okay? It's the spirit behind it that a conversation could change a life. So you might say it in a different way. You might notice that someone's less social than they used to be, not turning up for, team events, that sort of thing. And so you might just make that observation. No, you haven't been at the past events. That's not like you. Are you okay? Is everything okay? And the good thing about that is that it talks about something tangible, a change in behaviour, and that can really help the effectiveness of it and the authenticness of it. When we first started it, there was that, people said, oh, well, you can't just ask, are you okay, one day of the year, and that was never our plan. We of course have one day a year as a point of focus, and that's really important. But of course we want it to be, are you okay 365?
Right.
And I think one of the really great things is that it has been adapted for different industries. We've done an Are You OK Rail Week, and so railways, public and private sector railways around Australia celebrate a week. And, it's a male-dominated industry, 80% male, and so it's very, very helpful for that. We've done for the law industry, the vehicle industry, the hospitality industry, and I think they're done on different times outside of the actual Are You OK day, and so that's why we really hope to, to make it more just part of the DNA, and to some extent it has become that. You look at the recognition of the brand, it's like 85% unprompted, and yet we've only been around for like 15 odd years and have a very small team that work there and pretty small budgets by conventional measures.
I think that's what I found most powerful about it, was that you're not just asking, are you okay? You're implying that it's okay to not be okay.
Exactly.
And that was probably the most powerful part that I'd never experienced before.
Yeah, it was. And in fact, I did a session once with George Weston Foods. You know, their big brands are Tip Top and Don's Small Goods. And so the managing directors of both those divisions did a webinar around Are You OK? And the managing director of Don's talked about how he had struggled, about he'd had some issues with depression and that sort of thing. And but he sought help and got support and recovered well. And then the managing director of Tip Top Breads, he said, at George Weston Foods, it's okay to not be okay. So he explicitly said that. And then we had I shared my story and the background. And then we had, it was remote. It was right at the end of COVID, I think. So it was all virtual. But you could see the responses coming up in the feed. And I got a list of them afterwards. And people said things like, it makes me proud to be part of this company when we're talking about real things. We're all got families and friends and work colleagues, and we know this does go on, and so it's fantastic to do. Someone asked if there would be a copy of the video that he could show his wife and kids. So you hear things like that, it does make a real difference. It prompts changes in attitude and changes in behaviour.
Prompt that discussion, and also to share that discussion and to share those feelings with other people, other powerful people who might not be encouraged to let that be known in the first place. Yes. Well, this is a difficult business to be in, sustainability, and it can be rather bleak at times, the resistance that we're facing or the information that we're looking into the future and seeing. How do you encourage people to focus on the moment, or to take that information in stride and still focus on self-care?
Because it's really the only option. When we got ups and downs, there'll always be both. There'll always be both. And I think it's just really, really important to invest when you're going through some tougher times in your own mood, your own well-being, to get ready for the good times, and vice versa. That was a big mistake I made. I was the vice president for a division of Carney, and there was a big tech crash. Basically, our business crashed. And I just tried to work harder, it was the wrong thing to do. It really, now, it's easy to see now, but I think it's very important to sort of step back and keep a sense of calm, clarity and perspective. And you can only do that if you're in good mood yourself. If you're in the amber or the red zone, we think black and white. We don't see creative solutions. And, with the whole AI disruption, geopolitical, cost of living, there's lots and lots of reasons, to be anxious, but it's really, I think the one thing that I really learned was focusing on the things you can control. And you can go for a walk, you can catch up with friends, you can, try and look at a problem in a different way. And but you need to be in a good mood yourself to see creative solutions and to be able to put them into action.
And to be able to help other people with their care.
100%. One thing I shared this morning as well is that, care is a strong skill and it has tangible results. The Gallup organisation has been researching engagement, discretionary effort for 30 odd years. They now have down to just 12 questions, what they call the Q12. But one of those questions is, my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. It's been asked over 1 million times, 100 plus countries. And there's ironclad proof that shows the more people that strongly agree with that statement, the higher the productivity, profit, customer service levels, and the longer people stay there. I found it really interesting this morning that Amelia Evans from Queensland Airports she's been doing the Gallup survey, for her organisation. And she said that's one of their highest scores, is that my supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. And she said there's just amazing bonds in teams. When you care about them, you have each other's back. You encourage each other. You keep with each other, you joke with each other. But having that fundamental care is critical for long-term sustainable results.
I found that interesting that both of you had mentioned retention, employee retention, and I'd found that in general, employee retention tends to go down as people feel less cared for at work, and as they feel more cared for, it's easier to keep those employees. So yeah, there seems to be that very direct line between the two.
Absolutely.
And it's almost an indicator if you see that retention fall, it's something that as a leader you need to start paying attention to.
Yeah, definitely.
During COVID, there was clearly a crisis. People were in a position where their self-care was in jeopardy.
Yeah.
And I think people tend to band together during a crisis, and so this would be a point where they do start to have concern for other people, and they start to ask the question, are you okay? But it did seem as if when the crisis passed and COVID was over, that wasn't as much of an emphasis. Life got back to normal. So how do you push that dialogue to continue even when they're out of a perceived crisis situation?
Again, it's the only option because, as we all know, COVID is essentially finished, but other things really started to play out. We talked about, AI disruption. So there will always be things that happen. There will always be setbacks. But it's how you respond to those setbacks that really makes a difference. And it is about investing long term. And, at the breakfast, I also shared the story of Hawthorn, the football club that had one of their worst years ever in 2016. And Damien Hardwick, the coach, introduced this session where he shared his hardships, his highlights, and his heroes. And he was vulnerable, and, because the 2016 absolutely sucked. It was a terrible year for Richmond. But every one of those 45 people in the playing group and the coaching staff went through the same thing. And some shared some really vulnerable stuff. They lived in housing commission places and were embarrassed to invite their friends around. But it just built over that year an incredible trust and respect and psychological safety that, they won the premiership the very next year from coming in the last quartile of the table and then winning the premiership. It just shows that if you do it well, it has amazing results.
It's amazing what kind of an impact it can have. We're seeing now that there are more tools to help people through these. There's apps that people can use online, but there's also AI where people can actually be spoken to through an app and be able to express themselves without necessarily expressing themselves to another human being and being concerned about that stigma. Where do you see that technology going? Do you see it as a benefit, or do you feel that people should really be talking to each other rather than an app?
I think ultimately there is benefits in having, a very good AI coach or counsellor, because even if you do have a good counsellor, you might see them once a week, once every 2 weeks. And, there are some cautions with AI in terms of counselling and that sort of thing. But I think overall it's much more positive than it is negative, and I think it will evolve and be even more positive sort of thing. So I really think that providing it has the right guidelines and frameworks to follow, like really evidence-based frameworks, I think it's a positive thing, because ultimately most people don't seek help. And so if it's something less threatening, like being able to speak to an agent or speak to someone at Lifeline, it's a similar sort of thing. It's less threatening and intimidating.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a net positive if it's handled properly. Well, great. I think that's all the questions that I had.
Excellent.
Very
Excellent.
much appreciate you being on the show. It was excellent listening to you.
My pleasure, Seth.
And thank you for listening to another episode of Infrastructure Connections. Please take a moment to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and we'd like to hear your thoughts. Please leave a comment down below to let us know what you think. Until then, stay tuned for another episode of Infrastructure Connections.